Moving on to a very worrying story, because an inquiry has found that new mothers risk suffering lifelong injuries as hospitals cover up endemic failures in Britain's maternity system. Well, the country's first parliamentary inquiry into birth trauma also reported that good care for pregnant women is now the exception rather than the rule. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm now joined by Labour MP Rosie Duffield and the Tory MP Theo Clarke, and they co-chaired the inquiry, and they join us now from College Green outside Parliament. Thank you for joining us, to both of you. Can I first say how wonderful it is to see you guys putting aside your political differences and joining together on an issue which is so vitally important. Well done on that. It's fantastic to see people putting together for the common good. We need more of that in politics. Putting that to one side, Rosie, let's start with you. A lot of people reading this will be very, very horrified and surprised to hear that the type of maternal care and maternity care being offered to British mums is falling way short of the required levels. What did you find?
Well, I was involved with the Kirkup inquiry in East Kent a couple of years ago, and so I just sort of assumed it was an issue that was local to me. But Theo also had a similar inquiry in her area, and I think we were both surprised by how rife these problems were throughout the country.
OK, and Theo, you decided to put this report together. And what are your recommendations? What would you like to see happen?
So firstly, I think Rosie and I were both struck by the huge volume of submissions that we received from the British public. Over 1,300 women wrote to us with their stories. And I think what was immediately apparent when we were reviewing the testimonials was that this was, as Rosie said, not just one part of the UK where it was an issue, but it seems to be that there is, sadly, a postcode lottery on maternity services in this country. And I personally don't think that's acceptable, that where you live could literally result in you receiving a different level of care. So one of our headline recommendations in our report to the Prime Minister is to call for a national maternity framework which would set out a standardised level of care to all hospital trusts, and secondly to have a maternity commissioner or a new mumsar who'd be responsible for implementing that. And I think that's crucial that that person reports directly to the Prime Minister, because we must end the postcode lottery and listen to mums.
Absolutely.
And Rosie, one of the very concerning lines from the report is that it found that women were treated as an inconvenience, and errors were covered up by hospitals who frustrated parents' efforts to find answers. I went through a very traumatic birth, well, my wife did. When I witnessed that, it was very, very difficult. The hospital, I think, were quite worried about the outcome. Rather than protecting the mother, they seem more concerned about there not being any bad news coming out of it. Is that what you're finding here, that mothers who experience poor care, they're more or less treated as a problem to be managed rather than somebody to be helped at their weakest hours?
Yeah, and I'm really sorry that you and your wife had that experience. Some of the things that we've been told will stay with us both forever, and nobody should experience that. But you're right, instead of being seen as an inconvenience, and I think people are really frightened now of litigation and people suing them, and the hospital trusts are really scared of that after some of these big inquiries. The patient and the baby should obviously be the number one concern, and the family involved.
OK, and mothers obviously opened up with very intimate stories to both of you. How moved were you by some of those tales, and how brave do you think those mothers have been? Because this is a very, very difficult thing to talk about.
Well, I've obviously talked very publicly about my own traumatic birth, giving a speech in the House of Commons, so I know how incredibly difficult it is for mothers to come forward. So firstly, can I welcome so many mums that did, and I can say that every single response was read, and their submissions did inform the work of our inquiry. And it's interesting what you mentioned just then about fathers. I think I was quite struck that we didn't just receive recommendations from mothers, but also from dads and partners too. And I think there was one example that will really stay with me, when a father said to us in his oral evidence that the only time he was spoken to in labour was to ask, did he want to save his wife or his child? And that's completely unacceptable. This is not stuff that requires additional funding. This is about compassion, this is about empathy, and this is about a duty of care that the NHS has to its patients. And I was really shocked by some of the examples of language that we heard.
Yeah, and I know that primarily childbirth is, of course, about the mothers who should be protected and nurtured at all costs. But you're absolutely right, and thank you for mentioning that, because when a father-to-be witnesses a very traumatic birth, often involving surgery and all sorts of things that you're never ever prepared for. It's a very, very traumatic thing to witness, especially as you feel so powerless to intervene. How hopeful are you that your framework, your plan will be implemented?
I'm really hopeful. I mean, Theo's already met with the Prime Minister and given him a copy of the report, and we know that the Secretary of State, who's coming to our official launch soon, is really keen to make some of our recommendations, if she can't do all of them, part of her women's health strategy, and that's fantastic news.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your knowledge of such a worthwhile report. Thank you very much. That's the Labour MP, Rosie Duffield, and the Tory MP, Theo Clarke. And once again, well done on coming together and putting your party politics to one side. Nathan, it's just great to see that. You know, normally people should be tearing lumps out of each other in the Commons, but there they are with a common cause, putting all that to one side and sticking up for mothers, both in their constituencies and across the country. And a little nod there to fathers. I know it's not about the dads, I know it's not, but I'm just saying it can be traumatic too when you see surgery and all the rest of it and things start to go very, very wrong and you're never ever prepared for any of that in life. That's what happened to me. And suddenly when you think things can go very, very wrong, my first boy, came very, very close to not making it when he was born. And, you know, when that happens in front of you, you have no idea. You're all taught about storks and unicorns and the magic of parenthood. You're never prepared for what comes at you very, very fast. And to find out that mothers and some fathers, but ostensibly mothers, of course, are getting the brunt of this on maternity wards and not being cared for, not being nurtured and cherished at their most vulnerable time is incredibly hard to take. And hats off to both of them there. Hats off to both of them for sticking up for mothers in need. I love it.